of the Zero to Hero mentorship. Last week, we did a quick intro on agentic AI, the difference between Gen AI and agentic AI, strategies on how to use it. We did a quick demo on both the maker perspective of the use of AI. And you'll notice that as we advance in this training, I will make less use of the word maker and I'll start to use the keyword builder. This is where Microsoft is headed in terms of repurposing the maker into this new AI first world. But for lesson 2, I thought that we would bring my friend here, Geetha, to give us insight on the famous art of prompt building or prompt engineering. I remember when I started programming for the web, people talked a lot about building site components for web designers using the strategy of what you see is what you get. So as people were designing applications, the components had to have this particular feature or power, which is to allow designers to see what their website would look like during development time or design time. And we see something very similar with the AI first era, where it's not necessarily what you see is what you get, but what you provide as part of your prompts is what you're going to get on the other side. So I couldn't think of anybody else more enabled and with the knowledge in this area of prompt engineering and all things AI, to say the least. So I am very delighted to have Geetha here with us. Geetha, you can take time talk about your involvement with community or the cool things that you have been doing. Could be work related or community related, whatever. The floor is yours. And again, thank you so much for donating your time for us today.
No, thank you. Thanks for the opportunity. I'm super excited to be here. And I do have a bit of a network issue, so I have my camera on, but I'm going to turn it off after we take a picture, or Victor, just let me know when you're doing that. Yeah.
All right. Before you turn off, I will try then to take that picture now. So if you have cameras and you got your hair done like I did, turn it on. This is your moment to shine. I don't know why my Teams is doing this. We have quite a bit of people here, about 20 folks connected, but I only see 9. So if any of you, large gallery, that's what I needed. Okay, let's see if it's gonna change. Come on. All right, yeah, some of the folks are connecting now. Okay, anybody else wants to be in this shot? Turn your camera on. You got 30 seconds. A few more. I see my friend Celio here, looking good, Celio. Red goes good on you. Naima is here too. Mary, Christian, anybody else? Ben is here as well. Anyone else wants to be on camera? Carl, Eduardo. Awesome. All right, you got 10 more seconds if you want to be on this shot. All right. On the count of 3. 3, 2, 1. Amazing. Very good. All right. Geetha, floor is back. Mic is back to you. All right.
All right. Thank you so much. I am extremely excited to be a part of this whole mentoring series. And I can't wait to share some of my learnings, trials, and tribulations here. Can I get a little thumbs up if you're seeing my screen share all right? Is that coming through? Fine. Okay, perfect. All right. And first off, thanks to you all for taking time out of your day to attend the session today. So very thankful for that. And I hope you have some golden nuggets and takeaways from the session. I'd love to hear what you learned and what you're going to do with the takeaways that you have from the session. So here's a little bit about myself. I am an associate director at Productivity based out of Dallas, Texas, and part of the Microsoft architecture and strategy team. Always a power addict. MVP in the BizApp space. You can scan my QR code that I love connecting with people. I'm always open to helping and brainstorming and sharing ideas in the space. So be sure to connect with me. I'm also the founder and organizer of the Dallas Power Platform User Group. I am also helping the Women in Power Group, which is the Women in Power Platform Group, helping them with the events and networking space. So here today, our session is about the anatomy of prompts, especially in the LLM era. And so there are a couple of things that we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about why prompts matter, where they live. An important aspect of the Copilot Studio stack, or any Copilot for that matter, is the natural language understanding. So we'll kind of do a deep dive into that, on what that means and how orchestration happens when you're building agents. And then we'll also look at prompt ingredients, like what are the key ingredients for your prompt recipe, and then what are some strategies to make your prompt successful. And then finally, we'll talk about some do's and don'ts, and then we'll run, and if we have time, we'll run through a quick demo to use the strategies that we learned, feed that to a plan designer, have that create an agent, a simple agent, and then start asking questions and see how that responds. Now, this is going to be very heavy theory because this is the nature of the topic. So yawns are allowed, take, let me know if you need a break. I know how very theoretical sessions can be. So we'll try and keep it as interactive as we can. All right. So before we get started into the topic itself, I wanted to level set and start by grounding us in what prompts actually are, and what they're not. Now, prompts are not just questions we type into AI. That's typically how it's looked at, but I want us to get away from that mental mode of looking at it as a type of set of questions. Prompts are how you build custom generative AI capabilities. So they are how you can summarize large bodies of text, you can draft responses, you can categorize incoming emails, extract meaning from maybe any type of unstructured data. Think of prompt as a way to build a custom GPT function, but using a natural language. And here's the important part. They don't work because they're just clever. They work because there is the concept of language, which is the control mechanism for any large language model. So a lot in this session, you're going to hear a lot about like prompts and language and LLMs. So I just want to make sure that we take a step back and kind of level set on what those are. Now, large language models don't really have like buttons or configuration screens. They're more like an interface that or a system that can receive tasks, context, and any constraints completely through language. So that what that means is your prompts act as your runtime instructions, and they tell your model what to do, what information to take into account, and how do you respond, what type of audience to target. So in this session today, we're going to talk about a couple of prompt tricks. We're going to talk about some foundational concepts, particularly around how prompts shape your understanding, how they influence orchestration, and enable reliable and scalable AI experiences in the platform. Right. And by the end of the session, my goal is that for our audience here to, start thinking about prompts as inputs, and start thinking of them more like system design artifacts. So as you move into the world of agents, especially in the era of LLM, the quality of your prompts really determine how performant and how the quality of your systems are going to be that you're building out. Okay, so let's talk about why prompts matter. Now, when we talk about AI in the Power Platform, the first thing is to ground us in the idea that these prompts are like a core skill. Think of them as an essential interface. You want to. It's all about having clarity in the context you're providing, structuring your intent, and that's how humans. That's how we communicate that intent to the large language models. So unlike traditional software where logic is defined entirely by code or configuration, LLMs can respond to how we ask a question. So this means more from the standpoint of the quality of the outcome, which is very directly tied to the quality of the prompt. So in Power Apps or Power Automate or Copilot Studio, your prompts aren't just generating text. They are influencing the way your formulas work, how your flows orchestrate, this any summarization tasks that you do, any decision and logical orchestration that happens, and even the behavior of automation. And it's specifically very important in terms of fusion development, where you blend the worlds of pro code and low code, because now this becomes more of a shared language between your business users and what your makers are building. So a well-written prompt can capture business intent very clearly, while it still gives your makers the control to build those guardrails that are needed. So there's also an aspect of trust and risk here. So, LLMs will always give you an answer, even sometimes if they're hallucinating or wrong. But prompts are how you can set those boundaries for them. You can set the boundaries around what data is allowed, what format to return, what assumptions to make and not to make. And as you have like stronger prompts, it just you will start noticing that your AI becomes more operational. There's more repeatable patterns that help you scale your solutions. So prompt designing is not a nice to have skill anymore. I mean, this is like a core capability, and it's just as important as you writing a Power FX formula in Power Apps, or even writing expressions in Power Automate. So it's important to understand the whole anatomy of how prompts and patterns work, and that is what we're going to be looking at shortly. Now, before we get into the weeds of how prompts work, we want to also talk about where they live in the Power Platform. Some practical considerations to think about in terms of how they consume AI credits. There's, they are solution aware. It would be easy to think of prompts as just another configuration setting or a feature, but what you don't want to miss is what's happening under the hood, which is why they sit directly on top of large language models. And the traditional Power Platform logic is usually event driven. Like, for example, a button is clicked, or a flow, Power Automate Cloud Flow is triggered, or you have a rule that evaluates a specific request to be true or false. But if you think about large language models, they work a bit different. They operate entirely through language, which means language is not just an input, it is the control mechanism. And prompts are going to shape how you understand the intent and how you describe the behavior at runtime. So once you understand, then the next question becomes like, hey, where does that language actually get interpreted? How does it turn our actions into outcomes across systems? And this is where our next slide is going to be. We're going to get into the details of how the stack works and how Copilot Studio applies to the stack, especially with our series going. It's about being the rise of agents. So wanted to see we do a little bit of segue and focus on Copilot Studio. So here, this view shows you how Copilot Studio applies the entire Copilot stack. And then I want us to focus on the middle layer, which is orchestration, which I've highlighted there. This is where language understanding comes into play. The context, the prompts and actions, they all come together. So when a user types something, whether it's in Teams or you're on a chat interface or on an app, the system doesn't immediately like call a flow or knows what to do. What it has to do first is to answer the question around what is my end user actually trying to do? What context matters for the user? And is this a request? Is this an action? What should happen next? Now that interpretation happens in this layer, which is the language and orchestration layer. And this is where prompts actually become influencers. Your prompt will influence how that intent is understood, how that context that you need your LLM to carry forward, how is that maintained, and what decisions need to be orchestrated, and then what are some action skills and searches that need to be executed. So if you don't understand this layer, prompt designing can feel a little unpredictable. And so we want it to be more of an intentional system design when you're thinking about prompts. Um, I will go over to the next one. So now that we've talked about like where they live, why they matter, and then how important language and orchestration is for the whole, next what we want to think about is how Copilot or even any agent you build within Copilot Studio actually understand what an end user is saying. How do they understand the prompt? This is where natural language understanding comes in. And this is one of the foundational concepts that we need to understand how NLU works for us to better format our prompts. So here on the slide, we see three different ways that Copilot Studio can understand user language. Now, this is a visual that I picked up from the Copilot Studio implementation kind, which I have a link at the bottom. I also have another slide with resources, which once the deck is out, you'll have a bunch of resources to click on. But I love the guide because it has extremely important nuggets around understanding what happens under the hood. Now, there are three ways that Copilot Studio understands user language, which is built-in NLU, which is NLU stands for Natural Language Understanding. It's the custom Azure CLU, and then you also have generative orchestration. Now, the reason we have multiple options is because not every scenario needs the same level of intelligence or flexibility. So some interactions are predictable and structured. Some can be ambiguous, or you might need like a multi-step or cross-domain interface needed for the orchestration. And prompting can play a different role in each of these models. Now, when we say built-in NLU, and the diagram that we looked at before, that's a default out-of-the-box option, right? Where you can have clear trigger phrases, you can have very well-defined intents, and you're essentially just teaching the system, hey, when the user says this, they mean this. Like for example, if I were to type in a prompt saying, hey, check my PTO balance, and you want to map that to a single intent. So you know that it works really great because the domain is narrow, the language is predictable, and you can determine the behavior. Now, when do you go for the Azure CLU model? Now, the second piece, the Azure CLU, comes into play when your language becomes more complex or it's more domain specific. Like if it's less about trigger phases, but more about training your model to understand the nuance of what someone is saying. Like it could be something as simple as, hey, in my industry, when a user says this, maybe healthcare or construction, the same word can mean different things depending on the context. And so your prompts still matter. And now you need your prompts to work alongside a trained intent model. So in Azure CLU, a prompt is not a single generative instruction. It's a combination of your intent that you define, examples that you provide, and then the expectations from the entities that are involved in the request response process. So pretty much telling the system how to interpret language, but getting into layers of how they would interpret that. Um, Now, another thing that you want for let's talk about an example. Maybe that'll be easier to understand here. So let's say I have a prompt saying, "Hey, I need to staff a senior Power Platform architect for a healthcare project that's starting in April." Now, your CLU will get the intent. It will say, "Oh, wait, this is requesting project staffing. I understand that," and then just based on that, it can route what entities it needs to look at. It needs to look at a role. It knows the role is a Power Platform architect. It can look at an entity around seniority because we've specified that you need a senior architect. There is an entity around industry which can map to be a healthcare, and then it has some date aspects to it. So once your CLU detects your intent and entities, then it can route it to the right topic. So, and as part of that, you could, trigger a Power Automate flow, or you could make some queries to Dataverse, or you could even use generative prompts for summarization or recommendations. And so, you can always use the extracted role, the industry, the start date, and recommend, a couple of suitable candidates. And that's a good example of how you can have a downstream prompt to say, all right, give me, I'm looking to staff, but then now I want, give me a suggestion for internal candidates. So but what you want to keep in mind is the custom Azure CLU does come with a few things to consider in terms of there's additional configuration needed on the Azure side, which can involve some cost considerations. And then, there can be some service limits, so you want to check on that. And then you want to make sure that the intent and the topics and the model synchronization is kept in sync. So just something to keep in mind when you go over and start using an Azure CLU model. Now, the last pillar that we have there is dynamic chaining, which is the generative orchestration. Now, this is where we step into like the custom agent territory. So with you're no longer asking like, hey, what's the single intent? You're asking more around what is this end user trying to accomplish overall? Like, is there any information missing? What topic, actions, and knowledge info that needs to be changed together? So here your prompts become more of a reasoning layer, right? So, for example, if a user says, I need help onboarding like a new hire in 10 days, now that can involve a variety of things. Maybe it needs to get into your HR policy knowledge, it needs to get into your IT access requests, look at coordinating calendars, come up with follow up questions to understand what about the new hire and their role and their start dates and things like that. So dynamic chaining, it does allow your process to figure that out and not just try and match it to a single instance. So that this is how you have this transition of moving from a natural language understanding to a custom language understanding to dynamic chaining. So you are shifting how your prompting works from pattern matching to eventually doing more of orchestration and reasoning. All right. I want to get into like the actual ingredients of building out prompts, but before that, I wanted to also call out like why prompts are such powerful building blocks in the space. You could leverage the same underlying language models, but prompts, depending on the type of prompt that you use, you are allowed to unlock a variety of capabilities. At the simplest level, it can handle classification. So you can take an unstructured input, like let's say a support ticket or an email, and then you can categorize that by urgency, your department, or topic. Then the next comes summarization. They're very effective. So you think about like you have a multi-page RFP or there are like long email threads or meeting notes. If you have a well-designed prompt, you can turn all of that into concise requirements, risks, and action items and be ready for decision making. And then we have sentiment analysis. So this is one where the prompts help you go beyond what is said and understand how it was said. So more around detecting any escalation signals or there are like customer dissatisfaction before it, shows up in metrics. And then we have a few more at the bottom, like this, information extraction. So specifically around a good example would be like manually scanning emails or documents. You want to extract like structured data, maybe it has date information, budget, and you want to like push that into a Dataverse table, or you're trying to, trigger a flow. Another very common use case for prompts is the content rewriting, right? And this is usually very valuable in like enterprise environments where technical language needs to be translated into something that's more understandable and consumable for business users or even customers or vendors that you're working with. So that's one more. And the last one there is the response drafting. This is also another one of the very common uses of prompts. So you can generate very professional on-brand responses to some very common scenarios, like let's say you have a delivery delay in your process or there are service issues. You're still able to like keep human in the loop, but you can drive all of that with your prompt design by clearly defining what is the task, the context, what the expected output is. And then that's a good segue for us to now talk about what are the key ingredients for prompts. So now let's get into the weeds of how you would want to construct your prompts. Now, I've dropped a link at the bottom there, that has a prompting guide, which has some really good infographics around the key ingredients and strategies. And so, and I'll have that linked on the resources slide as well, so you can take a look. And you can download it as a PDF, and it's quite detailed in terms of you understanding the prompt engineering basics. Okay, so now that we understand where they live and why they matter, and we want to like talk about what does an effective prompt actually mean. Effective prompts aren't magic. I mean, they're built from a set of repeatable ingredients, and if any of these ingredients are missing, you will notice there's inconsistent output. There is a possibility of hallucination. Your results aren't usable or consumable by your flows or agents or in your apps. So think of prompts less like questions, but more like your design specification. So every prompt you create should be contextualized in a way where you're setting the stage for the task at hand, right? So the context helps AI understand just not what, but also the why behind your prompt so that you get more relevant and more accurate responses. So the very first ingredient there is the task. This is the most basic question the model needs answered. What exactly do you want me to do? What do you want the model to be acting upon? So if you give very vague tasks like just analyze this document or review this RFP, and you don't leave too much room for interpretation. So the task should be action oriented, should be very explicit. Like for example, here we're saying create a product feedback summary. Now, if your task is unclear, then everything that follows is going to be unreliable and your responses are not going to be relevant. So the next second important ingredient is context. So you need to explain why behind the task, not just the what. Like, who is this for? How will this output be used? What assumptions should AI avoid? Without context, the model cannot technically complete the task. And it may end up, like I said, they still come back with a response, but it may be the wrong level of complexity, it may have the wrong tone, the depth of the response may be different or not as desired as how you expect. So context is needed, especially, and it's important in agent scenarios where the same prompt can be reused for different situations. That the third ingredient there is the input data. So inputs are the actual data the AI is expected to work with. There are documents, logs, records, or variables all passed at runtime. A useful way to think about it is like think of prompts as functions and inputs are your parameters. Like in this case, we have reviews provided as a parameter, which is a variable. So you could plug in a dynamic value and then it's able to capture that value and work with it. So these are the inputs are like the actual data that your AI is expected to work with. It could be documents, logs, records, or variables that are passed during runtime. And so if you don't explicitly define what data the model should use, it will fill in the gaps, and that's where hallucinations originate, right? So you always want to label your inputs carefully so the context isn't lost at runtime. And then now the last ingredient there is the output expectations. So this is where you tell your model on how the response should look like. Is this for a human to read, or is this for a flow or an app or an agent to consume? So by specifying the format, structure, and tone, like for example, you can say, hey, it needs to be bullet points, or it needs to be in a JSON format. You are making that output reusable and in a way where you can automate and make that consumable for the end system. Now, the difference here is between AI that's interesting is that AI is operational, but once you have the ingredients right, the strategies will help you go from basic prompting to a more reliable system behavior. And we're going to talk about some of the strategies next in a couple more slides, and then we'll go through a demo. But these strategies are not just tricks; these are ways to reduce any ambiguity and these guide orchestration. So and that's where prompting starts to look a lot more like system design. So some of the key strategies that we're going to look at are like context and input, output formatting. We're going to look at few shot, which is in context learning, and then section delimiting. These are some 4 key strategies that we're going to do a quick overview of. All right. Let's look at context and input here. I will make sure my, okay. A strong strategy here is being very explicit about what's context versus what's input. So when your prompts run at runtime, variable names and any input parameters that you provide, they're replaced with actual values. Now, if the context isn't clearly stated, then it disappears. So instead of assuming that AI understands your domain, you have to spell it out. So you have it's very critical that when prompts are used across agents, topics, or workflows, the first and most important strategy is to be explicit about the context. So context should explain why something is happening, and input is more on, hey, what should AI operate on? Now, in Copilot Studio, this distinction matters even more because prompts often run at runtime with dynamic values. And then when the variables are injected, the original meaning disappears unless you explicitly restate it. And this is one of the most common causes for hallucination. So you want to make sure that you don't confuse the model behind the scenes. It's not missing information, but you provide the context to maintain continuity across the entire orchestration that happens. Now, without that, it's going to behave more like it's having like short-term memory loss, right? So the couple of tips there is just be explicit about what is input data, keeping in mind that the variable name is replaced. And then don't assume that AI already knows your domain nuances, and make sure that your prompt doesn't have any ambiguity. Like there's clarification in that prompt on what the expectation is. And as part of the prompt, you're not limited to just having one input variable. You could have multiple input variables. Now, in this example, here, this is talking about, hey, given the input data from our customer service logs, where logs is the input parameter, and then you're now specifying that's the context, that's the first part of the context. So now that stays and sticks as the prompt is processed and your agent orchestrates the content. So that's your way to categorize them, any concerns that come out of those logs. And then as it processes them and hands it over to another system, it will still have context, keeping the variable in account. All right. Now let's talk about output formatting. Now this is another key strategy. Now let's say if your output needs to feed into a Power Automate flow or maybe into Dataverse, or you have a multi-agent setup where it's in part of another agent step. You want to make sure that you have your output formatting enforced. So you can either enforce the structure, like saying, hey, it has to be JSON, or you enable think of it more of designing like a contract between AI and the next system. And this is where prompting turns into system design. So by default, LLMs produce prose, which is great for humans, but not doesn't really work for automation, right? So as soon as an output needs to feed into like a flow or a connector or another agent step, free text becomes a liability. So, and this is where you want to make sure that you match the format for the downstream usage, you specify the required fields, and you give examples of how you want this to be formatted for consumption for the end user. So in this example, it talks about like formatting the response as a JSON object. It's also giving specific cues around the fields that it needs as part of the output. So this guides your AI to respond in that exact format and ensuring the output includes those specific fields as part of the processing step. So one thing to keep in mind is if you don't have a structure defined as part of your output formatting, then you should assume that there is not going to be a reliable orchestration happening, and the responses are not going to be consistent. All right. This next one here is in context learning, which is also called few-shot, which is a terminology in AI. Now, this is a powerful strategy when behavior needs to be very specific. Like instead of just describing what you want, you show the model examples. You are effectively saying, hey, when you see something like this, here is how I expect you, AI, to respond. It's more like a lightweight training, but at runtime. So you're able to effectively specify what the intention here is. And sometimes I've noticed that in context learning is sometimes a misunderstood strategy. You're not training the model. You're showing it how to behave in the moment. You're basically, like, for example, it just helps you narrow down the model's probability space. So when you're saying, hey, when you see something like this, like, for example, we're saying, I love this product, it has changed my life. You're saying the sentiment is positive. You're giving an example of here's how the interpretation needs to be. And then you also want to give examples that are very relevant and closely related to the tasks. And then, but here's the thing. I mean, you don't have to be very accurate with the examples. I mean, this is something with AI, that's one thing to keep in mind. You're always going to keep refining, experimenting. It's a cycle. It is an innovation cycle that keeps happening. The more you see the outputs, the more you understand how it needs to be interpreted, and then you start refining how those. So it's no example. I mean, having an example, even if it's not the best example, is better than having no example at all. So now, if your examples are very similar, or they're very vague, or you're a little off the beat and not relevant, then you are going to reduce the accuracy of the responses. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind. A few short learning is very powerful for agents that classify content when we're routing to the next step, or you want your agent to be prioritizing certain actions, or even if they're applying business rules. So these are some examples of when you want to provide examples of how you want your agent to take that in context learning and apply that as an interpretation when it starts processing it as part of the model. All right. This next one here is section delimiting. So this is about structuring how AI thinks. So you break down a task into like named sections or steps. So that way you reduce ambiguity, and you can also improve consistency. And now this is very important in aspects where, or in solutions where you're using multi-step tasks or agentic workflows. So clear structure makes it extremely easy for orchestration, right? And you're able to like sequence actions and generate more unified responses. But section delimiting is more around controlling that order of thinking. The LLMs don't naturally think in steps unless you give them steps. So you provide delimiters so you can create clear boundaries. You can explicitly sequence the step, and you can also have a predictable structure for your outcomes. So it's very important when a prompt needs to either summarize content, or you're analyzing data, or you're wanting your agent to provide some recommendations, or you want to do like all of that in one execution. You want to make sure you have some section delimiters to make it easy to chain those actions and validate and any of their outputs, and then make sure that they have a way to recover if it comes back with any failures. Now here on the right there is an example of how you could use a multi-delimiting strategy. So each section is conveying a very clear purpose. And then the way to do it is to make sure that you have like numbered lists, give them directions around the expectations. Like, for example, here we're talking about, hey, when it comes to product performance, you want to list the top 5 performing products. And then if it's customer feedback, you're saying gather the common themes from the surveys. And then when it comes to recommendations, we're saying here, we want your actionable steps based on the analysis. And then you're also providing an output format saying it has to be structured, you need bullet points, you want to keep the tone more concise, you don't want it to be very detailed, you want it to be crisp and professional. So here are some ways to reduce that ambiguity with providing a structure and feeding your prompt in a way that it can instruct via language to your model on how it needs to capture that and process it. Okay, so taking a step back here, so this is the big picture, right? We've talked about like how prompt ingredients work. Prompt ingredients primarily give you clarity, and then you have prompt strategies that give you reliable responses. And as you move forward with agents or any orchestrations, they stop being prompts stop being like one-off inputs. They become more like control mechanisms, which is kind of like what we've been talking about since the beginning. So the better designed your prompts are, the more confidently you can let your agents act. And then they just get better with time, and you always test and refine. And you'll notice that in all of the strategies, test and refine is a best practice that I've listed, because that is how AI works. It evolves. There are changes to the models that happen. There is some model synchronization that needs to happen. So at all times, you have to have periodic checks and see how you leverage metrics, analyze the reporting and usage and responses that come back, and make sure that you always go back and refine the way the prompts are set up. All right. Before we get into a demo, I do want to kind of close this with something very practical. Everything on this slide here comes down to that one idea that, prompts are not questions, they are system instructions, right? And so let's talk about like some of the do's and don'ts when you start working with prompts. Now, when prompts are very vague, overloaded, or inconsistent, they are going to fail loudly. So and then that's what allows hallucinations to happen. There are broken flows, or there's unpredictable like agent behavior that's witnessed. So the do's on the left are really about reducing ambiguity and designing for reliability. So you want to be clear, define a structure, separate your inputs from the context, and all of that is how we narrow the model's decision space. You're amplifying how your model will work by doing everything that's listed in the do section. Now, the don'ts on the right are more about avoiding any risks, like making sure your assumptions are clear, there are no conflicting instructions, and then don't let any freeform output like hurt the oops sorry output hurt the accuracy of your response. So and this is a shift, this is something, it's a paradigm shift in how you think about writing prompts. And so do want you to, as we move from automation to agents, and you want to make sure that the prompt quality stops being more of a user experience concern, but becomes more of a reliability concern. So, good prompts will help you get better answers, and the great prompts will make it safe for AI to act and process it as part of the models behind the scenes. So whether you're building a simple copilot or a fully autonomous agent, you want to treat those prompts like code, and then design them intentionally and keep testing them continuously. That's the key to evolving your design as AI evolves, and also as your data evolves, or as business usage evolves. So just something to keep in mind. So that is kind of like what I had from a slide perspective. We can go over to a quick demo here. We still have a few minutes, so I am going to switch over and open up Copilot Studio here, so we can drop a little prompt and have it create an agent based on the instruction. So I'm just going to use a simple example of being our most favorite topic, which is licensing. So we'll try and build a licensing advisor agent, and we'll use one of the Microsoft links as an example. Let me go ahead and pull that over. Just give me a second. I'm going to try and bring up my prompt before let's see if I can paste my prompt here. And I'm going to pull up Notepad just so you can kind of see the prompt itself. Just so.
We do not see any share right now.
Oh, sorry. Thanks for letting me know. I thought it had.
We're blind.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't help. There we go. Is that better? You guys see it?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. Okay, so now here's a simple prompt that I have, right? Now, this gives, here you have the context. You're saying here, context here is you want to help users understand the Microsoft Power Platform licensing. And then the task is to create an agent. We are giving it context around the data. So we're saying here's the pricing information. We're going to go use the Power Apps pricing as our source. And then we're saying, this agent should, and then we're also giving it expectations around what the agent is expected to do. So we're saying it has to be a friendly advisor. You want the ability to compare license types. You should also give it the agent should also be able to calculate costs. It should be able to include what's in each plan, and it should consider any trial and developer information. And then we're giving some, what we talked about in terms of few shot learning and some delimiting there in terms of like, hey, you have to gather requirements in terms of the number of users and app type and current licenses. And then we're saying, hey, how do you want this output to be? We're saying we come up with bullet points if you're doing comparisons. You have to include dollar amounts and then suggest next steps. And then we've given another action for it to say, hey, if there are 100 plus users, go ahead and escalate to sales, because now, we wanted to become something that this agent can hand off to another human or maybe another process for a larger complex scenarios. And at the end, we were saying, the tone needs to be helpful and consultative, not salesy. So what I did here, though, is I went ahead and pasted that. And then I am going to, it's the same thing, I copy pasted it just right now. And then we're saying, go ahead and build an agent. We're going to go ahead and say, hit create. So we'll just give that few minutes here. Should be let's just give it a couple more seconds. It's still trying to set things up. And then you notice that it captured the right description. It said, hey, help users understand the licensing, pricing, and it took everything that I had in everything that was specified. So that it did a good job of that. Let's just give it, yep. And then you notice that it actually came back with the a set of instructions, and let's see how it actually put the instructions together. So these are instructions that the model generated behind the scenes. What we dropped there was our prompt. We gave it aspects from design constraints and guidelines, and all of this is something the model came back with in terms of instructions. And we followed our concept of using the ingredients in terms of task, context, expectations, output. And so we did a good job of that. So you can notice that it came back saying, hey, this needs to be a friendly licensing advisor. You want to understand these aspects of the plans. And then it gave back general guidelines. It's got the skills that it needs to be looking for. And then it also came back with some step-by-step instructions around what it should ask for. And this is driven primarily from this one line here, because I said gather requirements. This prompt triggered the model to understand here is the context of why the user wants it and how they want the AI to process it. And so it took that and came back with step-by-step instructions on how it should behave. And then you'll notice a bunch of them in terms of like suggesting next steps. It said, from small to medium. My prompt wasn't that huge. And that's the key here. Your prompt doesn't need to be very detailed. It needs to be crisp and clear so it can drive reliability. So that's something I do want to call out over here. But if you notice, we were very clear, we're very crisp. We made sure all the 4 ingredients are listed out. We also added a tone. We also said what it needs to do in case of errors or escalations. And then it came back with instructions that are relevant. And then if you notice at the bottom, it came back with an example too. So it said, hey, if I have 50 users and need multiple apps, what's the best plan? Then it said, this is how I want you to respond. So this is giving it an idea of referential context on how to process the query and how the response should be formatted. And then finally, it's come up with this, which, we didn't have. I've noticed that happen. as part of some of the prompts as well, where it does a good job. This is the agent going above and beyond, right? The LLMs going above and beyond to say, okay, we understand what you're trying to do with the prompt, and I'm going to throw in a few extra brownie points here in terms of doing a closing. So I said, okay, if you do confirm if they need more help with trials, and then provide some official links. Um, now it added a few suggestions around because it knows the source of information that I added, which was the Power Apps pricing. It did go ahead and drop a bunch of knowledge sources. Now you can add them if you want. It's up to you. You can always validate. Definitely do your due diligence when it comes to looking at the knowledge sources. Make sure that they are relevant, so you don't have redundant instructions, or you don't have non-relevant knowledge sources as part of your agent. So definitely something to do your diligence on, making sure that the recommendations are correct. Now, right now we haven't added any tools, but I just wanted to walk you through, like, let's just try and like ask a few questions and then see how it responds. Now you can always use this to extend your agent to either post a message in the channel or maybe send an email or extend it for handoff purposes and things like that. So let's go ahead. I haven't published this, it just got created and it was so fast. I think that's my favorite part about how the models work behind the scenes. It was able to capture the intent and context and create an agent in like really within 2 minutes. All right, now let me go ahead and like drop a question here. So let's ask the most simple question. What's the difference between per app and per user? Of course, there have been changes in the plans, but let's just go ahead and do that, see what it comes back with. Now, in the agent here, we are able to see how it's processing the information. So you can see the query. It sent a query warning the difference, and then it says include features, limitations, and pricings. Here are all the sources. You can also see the rationale behind it. I always like looking at the rationale to see what was the sequence of steps that the agent took. So you can see like it reviewed the scenario and the usage requirements, and then it hasn't asked me any follow-up questions yet, but that's because the question was pretty clear about just wanting to know the difference in the comparisons. And as part of our instructions, we did say that when it's a comparison, we wanted to give us a format where it compares the plans, and so it made sure that it gives us a summary table at the bottom. And you can notice that it gave us bullet points. All of this is from it has the citation on which source that it took the information from. So we have that. And then at the bottom says, would you like a cost calculator or help choosing the best plan? So let's go ahead and say yes. Let me see what it does. Yep. And then now it, did come back with what the per app plan and gives a kind of guidance around when to choose which plan versus the other. And it's quite detailed, and then it has, a lot of accurate information. Now, just like any other AI process that you build, I always recommend even my customers or even even if I were to be building one, is to add a little note at the bottom that these responses are AI generated, and there's always a due diligence needed on our end to make sure that the outcomes are accurate. But the good part here is they are linked to the resources, so you always have a way to go and double check that's the right response. But yeah, wanted to show you a good example of that. I think I saw a question in the chat. How to prevent.
It's not a question.
Okay, there we go. How to prevent the GPT to want to please? Oh, yeah, that's a good question. That kind of gets at a very fundamental challenge, right? When you're working with large language models, I mean, the tendency for GPT is is to be overly like agreeable and very people pleasing. I mean, the way to do it is through prompt design techniques, right? Being very explicit in your prompt that you want critical thinking and like pushback. Like for example, like add in the prompt saying, "Hey, challenge assumptions, like point out flaws in your reasoning." Or say, hey, if a request doesn't make sense and cannot be improved, then say it directly. Or you say, hey, prioritize accuracy and don't be agreeable. Like I even do that when I'm on ChatGPT and I'm like, asking a question. I'm like, don't agree with everything I'm saying. Just come back with some rationale behind it, things like that. So, and then you can also request specific behaviors in your prompt, right? You can in your prompts you can ask for like alternative viewpoints. You can throw questions like, hey, what could go wrong, or what am I missing? Those are some ways to identify any potential problems on edge cases. Let's see. Another way you could do is maybe even use like structured reasoning, right? Like make sure you tell the model that you need to do a step-by-step process to identify, or say list pros and cons. So that way it's not always pleasing. It actually comes back with what the reality is. And then you can also another example would be, I think I was doing one a couple of days back. I was trying to plan something out, and I said, hey, give me 3 reasons why this approach might fail. Like, yeah, it's always giving me a response. They say, oh, this is great. This is perfect. It aligns with what you had in mind. I was like, nope, now give me 3 reasons on why this is going to fail. So I think there's from a prompt standpoint, those are some ways to deal with it. Now, and then also, a few short examples that we talked about, maybe show some examples on where, how it can, where scenarios where you wanted to disagree or you wanted to identify a problem rather than just complying with whatever you give. So I think those are some good ways to do that. Yeah. Let's see. Um, I see a question from, is it John? If you provide access,
Yeah, I think
can you
this one's.
explain the question for me? I'm trying to understand that.
Yeah, no problem. So like while you're building your prompt, if you do provide a URL plus all the accesses required, can the model build the like all the content, the flow to link to an external data and provide it to the model?
So you
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
go down, go for it.
Um, yeah. So I was just going to say, I think it depends. Now, there are ways to do it, like in terms of, I, are you asking more like you wanted to automatically connect to the external data? Is that possible? Is that the question?
Actually, I know that with Copilot, you can manually do it. So
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can link through a flow to an external data. However, if I do provide it to the prompt, will the system actually will Copilot be smart enough to build it for myself, or will I have still to achieve
Oh,
those manually?
yeah. Okay. I mean,
So
in terms of, yeah, go ahead.
yeah,
Go ahead. Vikram.
sorry, Geeta. What I was gonna say is Microsoft attempted to do that within the tools themselves. So, for example, at one point they had a prompt box in the landing page for Power Automate, where you would use natural language to tell what you wanted to build.
Mhm.
But I don't think you can do it from this place here where, you know, you want to create the automation from the prompt here. Maybe it creates the connectors and all that, but I don't think it will do everything for you.
Yeah.
Okay, just trying to define the boundaries before my frustration.
Yeah. Yeah.
The thing
I
is, though,
know.
the example that Gita showed here, I think it was very powerful to the extent that she included the knowledge sources into the prompt, and then it went ahead and created those links for you. I believe that for some of these knowledge sources, it will build the plumbing for you. But then if you expand into what these LLMs are able to do, I don't think it will do all. I'll give you an example. Should we start this prompt by saying, I have all this data in my Salesforce, for example? You would expect at some point here, Copilot would say, hey, I don't have the creds for all these services. We're going to have to work together on this one to get there, right? But for some of the knowledge sources that are maybe publicly available on the web, or where Microsoft has ownership of the technology, maybe it will start to build, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
thanks.
No problem.
We can take one more question, maybe, and I want to respect everybody's time. See, what's the ALM look for prompts? That's a very good question. Um, so, honest answer is that prompt ALM is evolving. That as compared to like traditional ALM that you would expect, but what's managed today, what's available today is like your agent level prompts, like your system prompts and instructions. They're stored in your agent definition, and they move with the solution that you built, right? And then the same with like topic level generative answers, like your configurations for generated responses within topics are also solution aware, so that also moves. Um, and knowledge sources, like for example, if you're like referencing SharePoint or like websites or uploaded files, those travel with the agent as well. I mean, not the actual content, but at least the references travel. Now, where I think it can get a little challenging is like if you are looking at like data synchronization, like for example, your knowledge sources might be very environment specific and your agent definition references them, then you want to have processes to keep that aligned. And then also, like if you're looking for more advanced version controlling of your prompt iterations, like unlike code, like there's not like a built-in way to do like a difference or merge capability for prompt changes, right? You either have to like track it manually or through external documentation, or you can always have an external versioning system where you store those prompts in Git or DevOps with timestamps and metadata. And of course, you can use like environment variables as well to ground some of those external sources. But yeah, I think those are some areas that there's still some room, which I think will eventually get to have parity with like reflexed ALM. Thank you.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I think Chris will address some of these questions in the two next lessons. His next one is titled, You Want to Put Your Agent into Production. So I would assume that some of the ALM aspects of developing this AI first world will be addressed there. But this is a very good question. I saw a demo from a community member where he was doing agent to agent conversation handovers, crazy stuff. I mean, he built about 40 to 50 agents, and they work autonomously and engage with each other. And so it'll be interesting to see how folks are actually controlling versions, as Geeta mentioned, and
Mm-hmm.
also the whole moving of assets from environment to environment.
Yeah.
I'm curious for that one. And with that, I'd say, first of all, thank you, Geeta, for this. This is one lesson, though, that you probably want to bookmark and then go back and rewatch it multiple times. Geeta, if I would say, I would strongly advise you to maybe put a ebook out or maybe a full blown book